Greetings, ladies and gentlemen! My name is Mengs, and today I welcome you guys to the very first remastered Fire Emblem character spotlights. Louise was the very first character I featured on this series over 3 years ago, and in my campaign to get her votes for the Choose Your Legends Heroes popularity poll, I said I would remaster the spotlight if Louise got into the top 200, which honestly I didn't think would happen. She ended up ranking number 72, and is now in fact number 1 on the list of Blazing Sword characters yet to be added into the game. Thank you guys, it really means a lot. Anyway, it's time to fulfill my end of the bargain. Let's see how much I've improved since July 2015. Let's begin the remastered spotlight of the Lady of Violets and one of my favorite Fire Emblem female characters of all time, Louise. Louise is the Countess of Rigley and the wife of the former Etrurian Mage General Pence. She is also the mother of Klein and Clarine from Binding Blade. Additionally, she is a distant relative to Queen Helena of Bern, meaning Louise is in fact related to King Sephiel. Louise grew up in Etruria, and while she hailed from a noble family, she was, according to herself, of low noble birth. We know very little about her family or her upbringing, but it is obvious that growing up, she was more interested in developing her skills in archery rather than training to become a lady of the court, as according to herself, she could shoot with a bow much better than she could dance or sing. When she was just 14 years old, Louise was part of a group of 20 noblewomen who were brought into the Rigley mansion in Etruria to be considered for marriage to the young Lord Pence. Before they could ask for his hand, each of the women had to demonstrate a special quality to impress him. Most of the women showed off their skills in dancing, singing, and poetry, but Louise was not able to match them in any of those fields, though she badly wanted to impress Lord Pence. When she was asked to demonstrate her special skill, Louise merely held up her bow and said that if Pence chose her, she would protect him to his life's end. This caused everyone in the room to burst out in laughter, with Louise feeling scornful gazes all around her. As she thought she had failed her tests, she noticed that one person in the room was not laughing along with the others, and he walked up to her, took her by the hand as he smiled. That man was Lord Pence, and he had chosen his wife. In the events of Blazing Sword, Louise plays a small but very important role, as she uses her influence and relations to Queen Helena of Bern to get Lyn, Eliwood, and Hector into the royal court, and thus they are given the mission to obtain the Fire Emblem in return for directions to the Shrine of Seals. Thus, without Louise, they never would have obtained the legendary weapons needed to kill Nergal. Also, these events later leads to Queen Helena giving them the Heaven Seal that was originally planned for Sephiel. Just imagine how dangerous that guy would have been in Binding Blade with that thing. Because of these events, Louise is the true MVP of not only Blazing Sword, but Binding Blade as well. Oh, and she also fights a fire-breathing dragon while pregnant with Klein. Louise is graceful, serene, loving, and kind, but is also described as sometimes acting a little childlike, or even a bit odd. One of her most iconic traits, however, is her devotion to her husband. She displays all the qualities of a loving, devoted wife. While Pent and Louise's relationship seems rock solid on the surface, we do actually learn that Louise is a little unhappy with her husband through their support conversations, which are unlocked on certain maps as talk conversations in specific chapters. The first one in Cog of Destiny, the second in Victory or Death, and the third one in the very final chapter against the Fire Dragon. In their supports, Louise remarks that Pent spends most of his time reading and sometimes don't even touches the meals she prepares for him, and upon hearing this, Pent promises her that he will be a better husband and spend more time with his wife in the future, which makes Louise very happy. Louise has a very close relationship with Pent's apprentice Urk, who she treats almost like her own adoptive son, and in their support conversations we really get to see Louise's motherly side. We learned that while Urk was studying under Pent in Castle Rigley, he often secluded himself in his chambers and didn't talk to anyone, and at one point he even collapsed due to exhaustion because he refused to take meals. Louise then took care of him and nursed him back to health. She even cleaned his room and washed his clothes. Urk was not used to being treated with so much love and affection, and found it extremely uncomfortable at first, but he warmed up to Louise eventually, and in the end, he ended up bonding with both her and Lord Pence. Louise also expresses a lot of motherly concern for Hawkeye's daughter Igreen, who is a young girl of around 10 years of age during the events of Blazing Sword. While Hawkeye insists that Igreen will be fine without her father around in Arcadia, as she needs to get used to a life of solitude as the future guardian of Nabata, Louise implores him that Igreen needs her father and convinces Hawkeye to go visit her after the war, also sending with him a gift, a bow she bought in Etruria that matches her own. In her support with Rebecca, Louise takes on the role of a mentor to the young village girl, who badly wants to become more ladylike and clearly views Louise as a role model, begging her to teach her proper etiquette, though Louise remarks that it wasn't her skill as a lady that landed her the marriage with Pence, and tells Rebecca that she is already charming as she is. In many ways, Louise probably sees a lot of herself in Rebecca. Though they both come from completely different environments, Louise was probably very similar to her as a teenager. Despite being of noble birth, Louise refuses to be treated differently because of her status. When Heath insists on protecting her on the battlefield, Louise politely refuses his assistance and tells him to go elsewhere. This attitude of not wanting special treatment most likely stems from the fact that Louise grew up in the low nobility of Etruria, and was therefore probably not always treated well by the other nobles. This means that despite being a noblewoman herself, Louise seems more grounded in reality, and probably knows a lot more about the plight of the common people compared to most other of her status. In her support with Guy, we get to see Louise's odd but childlike nature, as she sneaks up on him from behind and proceeds to braid his hair in the middle of a battle. In this conversation, she also talks about how she wants to be a mother, and that she hopes her future children grows up to be brave and strong like the young Myrmidon. In this conversation, Guy is absolutely stricken by how gorgeous Louise is, though he also finds her to be incredibly strange. Louise is also one of the few women who gets hit on by Sane that does not respond to his flirtatious nature with insults or scornful rejection, but is in fact rather polite towards him, though when Sane realizes he is hitting on a married woman, he quickly runs away with his tail between his legs, saving her the trouble of rejecting him. Despite this rather comical encounter, Louise appears to be very amused by the young Kaelan Knight, and seems to cherish and enjoy the attention. According to the Japanese Blazing Sword instruction manual, Louise is in her 20s. The name Louise is a feminized version of the name Lois, which means famous warrior. In her support conversations with Heath and Urk, we hear the name Wrigley being used. This is most likely a translation error and is supposed to say Wrigley. In the first Heroes Choose Your Legends poll, Louise ranked number 306. In the second Legends poll, she ranked number 72. The reasons for this sudden jump in popularity are still unknown. Louise is scientifically proven to be the most beautiful woman in Fire Emblem. Link to these studies can be found in the video description below. After the events of Blazing Sword, Louise returns home with her husband to Etruria and gives birth to 2 children, Klein and Clarine. To focus on his studies, Pent resigns from his position as Mage General of Etruria, an action that causes a lot of uproar and outrage. While Pent and Louise are mentioned in a support conversation between Deke and Clarine in Binding Blade, they are nowhere to be seen during the events of the game, and it is even stated that they may not even be aware that their children are fighting in the Lycian army. Louise will join your party in the map Unfulfilled Heart, which is chapter 24 of Eliwood's story and chapter 25 in Hector's story. She is a late-game sniper with decent base stats, with her strongest areas being her skill, luck, speed, and resistance. She also comes with a very solid A rank in bows, allowing her to use every single bow in the game up until this point. Her base strength of 12 is on the low side, but armed with her silver bow, she is more than capable of taking down most enemies on player face, and is particularly adept at sniping off the Wyvern Knights encountered in the chapter she joins in. Louise may appear deceptively frail with 28 hit points and 9 defense, but her high speed and luck allows her to dodge most incoming attacks, especially if she is positioned on terrain. Her high base resistance of 12 also means that most regular magic attacks will simply bounce off her, practically making her a, yes, I'm going to say it, mage killer. Louise's growth rates are decent for a pre-promoted unit, but due to her class, she will gain experience at a pretty low rate compared to other units, seeing as snipers generally don't get a lot of kills, so unless you go out of your way to deliberately feed Louise promoted enemies and boss kills, you shouldn't really expect her to outgrow her bases by more than a few points over the course of the game. With Louise, what you see is mostly what you get. Needless to say, if you train Will and Rebecca from the early game, they will both obviously have higher stats than Louise at the time she joins, but the whole appeal of Louise is that she can pretty much perform the job of Will and Rebecca just as well as they can without any prior investments. Not to mention, Rebecca and Will are both a big pain to train, and are seldom worth the time or experience required to turn them into snipers. Using Louise also means that you can sell the extra Orient's bolts to the vendor, which gets you some extra cash. Being a sniper locked to bows is an obvious detriment to anyone familiar with Fire Emblem. This phenomenon is more commonly referred to as the Archer Curse. Because of her inability to retaliate at close range, Louise really won't contribute much during the enemy phase, which is where most of the action takes place. But at this point, you should have multiple strong units capable of tanking the front lines, and Louise might serve as a nice backup unit instead. Most players don't really field her all that much beyond the chapter she joins in, but she does have a few advantages that newer players tend to overlook. Due to Blazing Sword's lack of viable bow units, with Will and Rebecca being rather subpar, Wrath joining late and underleveled, and Geats often not showing up at all due to the route splits, you will probably have several expensive bows lying around in your convoy by the time Louise joins the fray. Armed with a killer bow, her crit rate is pretty high, and you can usually rely on at least one of her 2 attacks dealing triple damage. She might also be able to pick off a few unpromoted enemies with a longbow, which can occasionally be useful if the enemies are on the other side of a wall or in otherwise hard to reach locations. She can also use the Brave Bow right away, but this does slow her down by 6 points, putting her speed down to that of Hawkeye, making it difficult for her to quadruple any enemy with decent speed. Though with this weapon, she is one of the few units capable of doubling the Valkyries in Cog of Destiny on Hector Hard Mode, which can be very useful. One of Louise's most unique aspects is her automatic A-rank support with her husband Pence, who joins in the same chapter. While Louise may not be a very impressive unit in her own rights, Pent is easily one of the best magic users in the entire game, with his insane base stats and weapon ranks, and when both of them are fielded together on the battlefield, they provide each other with some substantial buffs. In particular, Louise provides Pent with a very solid 3 extra defense and resistance, really adding to his bulk, allowing him to take on hordes of enemies at once. By having Pent placed in front of Louise, shielding her from frontal one-range attacks, they really make quite the team together, and they are both extremely hard to kill when in close proximity to one another. This automatic A-rank support does come with a drawback. If you lose either Louise or Pent, both of them will leave, meaning their lives are effectively linked. Because most players tend to reset once they lose a unit, this doesn't really tend to be a huge drawback, but if you are doing, say, an Iron Man run, this might really screw you over, but it's usually completely inconsequential. One small but very notable advantage that Louise has that a lot of players may not know about is that she is one of the few characters who can go up against the dreaded Luna Druids in the late game without risking a critical hit in return. Remember that the Lunatome is on absolute steroids in Blazing Sword, and these annoying druids have forced many a restart for unsuspecting players, getting a bit unlucky with the RNG. Louise's high luck, combined with her husband's ice affinity, boosting her crit avoid even further, means that Louise might be your best bet against these foes, as a Luna crit can pretty much kill anyone in your army regardless of their level. Louise can also be an absolute lifesaver in the chapter Sands of Time, where really strong, high-level druids frequently spawn from the stairways to the north. If you place Louise just at the edge of their range, she can pick them off as they come in, completely neutralizing them. And this is actually a job that even her husband can't perform as well, due to the druid's high resistance and weapon triangle advantage against him. There really isn't that many saving graces to a pre-promoted sniper that joins as late as Louise. The white gem she carries is seen by many as a bigger contribution to your party than Louise herself. She simply is not a very impressive unit, but she can serve a nice supportive role in your army, and if you field her together with Pent, they are quite a formidable tag team. Take good care of this lovely noblewoman and her bow will protect you well. While a lot of you guys are probably expecting me to do a jokey meme review and rate Louise a triple 5-star right off the bat, I have actually decided to put aside my bias for this review and try to rate her as objectively as I possibly can. Louise's character has been critiqued in the fandom for being sort of bland, and I can definitely see where these accusations come from. Louise simply isn't a character with a lot of depth or personality. She is, for the most part, a pretty simple, one-dimensional character, and her supports, although incredibly charming, doesn't hold an extraordinary amount of substance that develops her character in any meaningful ways, aside from her support with Rebecca, which explains the origins of her marriage with Pence. She really needed more conversations like that, in my honest opinion. Still, while Louise may not be a very exciting character, I find that she certainly is a refreshing one. In a waifu-centric franchise such as Fire Emblem, where a lot of the attractive characters have to be reserved as romantic interests for shipping purposes, a character that is already married upon joining the player's party is extremely rare, and only seen in a few other instances in the franchise. Furthermore, Louise's loyalty to her husband is extremely admirable, and their marriage really reflects what a healthy relationship should look like. I also like the fact that while Louise is a noblewoman, she is still down to earth and not pompous and arrogant like certain other members of the Reglay family. I rate her a solid 3 out of 5 stars. She isn't a fantastic character, but by no means a bad one. Alright, so this might be the part where my bias really shines through. It's absolutely no secret that I find Louise to be insanely attractive, but I think that even people who don't find her as alluring as I do will still admit that her design is extremely well done. There is a lot more to Louise than just another pretty face or great pair of legs, and that is her contrasting appeal, which is really well done. On one side, Louise's attire shows off elements of her noble heritage, with her expensive-looking embroidered vests, elegant gloves, and high boots, while at the same time, her shoulder pads and long cape gives her the look of a seasoned adventurer who can easily travel the roads and sleep under the stars if she needs to. Another great contrast Louise displays is that between strength and warmth. Her pose and attire reflects a seasoned, battle-hardened archer with experience in battle that can easily fend for herself, while on the other side, her round hips, long legs, and hourglass-like figure gives off a motherly, caring vibe, which really makes her look both gentle and alluring. Personally, I have always been a massive fan of contrasts in a character's design, whether it be simple color schemes like black on whites, or the combination of innocent and sexy, and Louise got plenty of both. On a side note, I also find it incredibly cool that Louise and Pent share matching hair braids, a small detail that is often overlooked. While I think it's impossible for me to cast aside my obvious bias when rating Louise in this area, I simply cannot find a single reason to rate Louise anything below a perfect 5 out of 5 star rating. She really is the perfect package to me. Okay, so this might be the part that most people are interested in, because ever since I jokingly rated Louise 5 out of 5 stars in my Fire Emblem 7 Let's Play with Mecha, I've gotten a lot of questions from a lot of different people wondering how I actually objectively rate Louise's utility in Fire Emblem 7, and you guys are about to find out. Now, in order to do this, I performed a little bit of a thought experiment. I simply mentally projected Louise's stats and growth rates over on a generic sniper and put him into Fire Emblem 7. Then I just rated the unit as I saw it, and after doing so, there really wasn't anything other to do than to admit that Louise is not a very good unit. I hate to say it, but it's true. She joins late, she is locked to bows, she lacks a mount, and her offense isn't even that impressive compared to some of the other units you should have at this point during the game. Now sure, good weapon ranks and an instant A rank support is nice, but it's not really needed. Pent will easily massacre entire maps on his own just fine without the assistance of his wife. Now, while it's certainly enjoyable to try and make Louise work if you're hellbent on using her, and she certainly had her moments in the sun during my recent Let's Play, she was an absolute star in both Cog of Destiny and Sands of Time, but despite that, simple fact remains that she is one of the most underwhelming characters in the Blazing Sword roster. And while she isn't down there in 1-star land next to Rebecca and Will, it's difficult to rate Louise any higher than 2 out of 5 stars. Sorry, waifu. Thank you so much for watching this Fire Emblem character spotlight. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider helping out this video with a like and let me know what character you want to see me feature in a future spotlight by leaving a comment below. I would like to give a huge shout out to this amazing and talented artist, and because I know I won't be able to pronounce his name properly, I'm just going to leave it on the screen instead. You may have seen his recent high quality Fire Emblem sprites, especially his Rebecca one that recently blew up on Twitter and Reddit, and as some of you may have already noticed if you paid attention to the spotlight, he just did one for Louise as well, and what a fantastic job he did at that. I recommend you go follow him on Twitter and check out his DeviantArt page if you want to see more of his stuff, link in the video description. He is extremely good, and he also takes commissions, though he is also very busy, so you're lucky if you manage to get a hold of the guy. Before we end this video, I want to give a massive shout out to my amazing Patreon supporters. You guys are the best and I really appreciate each and every one of you. You make it possible for me to produce all this Fire Emblem content for you all on a daily basis, especially now that YouTube is demonetizing videos left, right and center for seemingly no reason at all. If you become a Patreon supporter today, you get instant access to my Patreon only Discord chat, the ability to participate in Patreon hangouts and ask questions for my Patreon Q&A videos. Also, if you become a silver tier Patreon, you can request your very own Fire Emblem character spotlight, alongside a drawing of your favorite Fire Emblem character done personally by my designer. You can check out our Instagram or Facebook page by clicking the link in the video description to see some of the work she's done previously. She is extremely talented. Also, my 2 script readers, Sonagi and Heliasan, help me with the fine-tuning of the script of the spotlight, along with Mecha, who also assists with correcting errors and mistakes. Anyway, that's all for now. If you want to see more spotlights, check out the playlist linked in front of you. There's also another direct link which will take you to the previous spotlight I did. Anyway, my name is Mangs. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. You are a true fan. Don't forget to leave that like, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.